We acknowledge the Ancient Ones, the Greater Shamanic Council of Light, Hermes, both Trismegistus and Seshet, Lady of the Measuring Cord, as above so below, as within so without. We acknowledge Imhotep, architect of the cosmos.
May the earth
be the mirror of heaven. We acknowledge the sacred order of the Magi, and all throughout history who knew, like now, a turning of the ages. We acknowledge the master builders of Göbekli Tepe and the great shining ones at Kalash, the courage and knowledge of the Polynesian wayfinders traversing the great oceans. We acknowledge the prophetic traditions of Ezekiel and Daniel, the traditions of Avalon, the Merlin, and the Round Table, the calendric wizardry of the Maya, and the Venus teachings from Mesoamerica, the Jupiter teachings originating in China, and the Vedic lunar mansion traditions, the Babylonian and Sumerian sidereal zodiacs, the brilliant Hellenistic invention of the seasonal zodiac. The Neolithic peoples around the planet, some still today, honoring the sacred connection between the land and the sky. The Tuatha De Danann in Ireland, who created a time of 2,000 years of peace, the builders of Newgrange. My teachers that are not in human form, Mount Shasta, the Grandfather Rock at the Wonderland of Rocks in Joshua Tree, Mount Haleakala on Maui, the Fish Lake Valley, Hierophany, and the sacred landscapes around the planet, the astrosophy of Rudolf Steiner, and the esoteric astrology of DK in the Tibetan, both presaging the shamanic astrology paradigm, and particularly the archetypal visions of C.G. Jung and the cosmology of my mentor, Dane Rijar. For these and more, we give thanks.
Hi, everybody. This is Daniel Gimario, and this is the monthly Vlogcast that I do one of these every month now, just before the full moon. And I'm joined here today by Alwyn, who is our treasurer and managing director. And Alwyn has been helping me do the research on this, and he'll be sharing with me as we go through this material today. In fact, we've even made a discovery just before we went on the air started the filming today. So the subject today is going to be related to the articles that recently came out in the newsletter. There was a part 1 a couple months ago. Then there's part 2 that came out at the new moon, looking at the U.S. chart. And so we can maybe put up the title page there. This has actually been on my radar for some time now. Just as a little backstory, back in 2017, we had a summit in the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School that was called Preparing for 2020. This was at the end of 2017, because it was pretty evident that in world history, different frameworks, certainly obviously using many different versions of astrology, that something rather major would happen in 2020, 2021. Not exactly knowing what, but it seemed to be enough to be aware of to way back in 2017 to try to prepare people for what could happen in 2020. Well, I've been having this exact same feeling regarding the United States and in general to European history, the rest, like Europe, or we could say the Five Eyes, but I want to put my full attention here on the United States because I've been looking a lot about the United States chart. So this is our conversation today, our exploration today is what is happening with the chart of the United States. And this will include the light and shadow, kind of the three worlds approach to looking at the upcoming situation, the different astrological cycles, certainly. It says here the triple cross eclipses Well, we have discovered that actually, if you include the 2012 annular eclipse, it's actually a quadruple cross. And then we're going to also bring in about the fourth turning, that framework that has been very influential in different aspects of the paradigm. This therefore is like a central area of research, and we're going to have an even larger and more intensive dive into this at our June solstice seminars. There will be one on the upcoming cycles of 2020, 2023, 2024. So in a way, this could be thought of as a larger project preparing for 2023, 2024. But we're getting many, many different things that are happening in this current upcoming eclipse season that can presage what is going to come. So let us look at the chart of the US. Okay. There are many, many different versions of the US chart. There's controversy about it. Different people have different opinions. There's different opinions even about July 4th, 1776. Due to my long involvement with Dane Bridjar's work and being so highly influenced by him in the early years, I do trust and like working with his rectification of the US chart. And that's what we're looking at right now. And several things are circled here. But I do want to point out just a number of things, and these are the things we're going to be referencing as we go through this inquiry today. You'll see Pluto, 27 Capricorn, and the US will soon be in its Pluto return starting next year. 248 years Pluto cycle coming back to its starting point. Also, we see Chiron circled, and that centers in on 2024. But of course, there's some already who believe that the Pluto return even starts this year, and so therefore the Chiron return could start a year earlier. But both of them are definitely involved in the 2023-2024 events that we'll be looking at. So just those are, you can understand why those are circled. They're going to show prominently in what we talk about in this over these next minutes. I also want to point out several other features of the US chart that will come into our conversation. One is the Aquarius moon, 27 Aquarius. And then using the shamanic astrology paradigm, the lineage storyline for the US is the Gemini job in the Aquarius tribe, south node of the moon in the third house. And then also then the storyline for current life purpose, or we could say the destination point, or the future, the directional flow of the soul of the US moving in the direction of the Sagittarius job in the Sagittarius tribe, Sag rising, north node in the 9th house. And that is applying the main standards of the shamanic astrology paradigm. And that will actually, that combo, the Aquarian lineage, the Gemini job, the Sag, what does it mean? The Sagittarius job in the Sagittarius tribe, and so on, will also be part of our investigation of the shadow and light of this chart. Also note the position of Mars and Uranus. Mars at 21 Gemini, Uranus at 8 Gemini. And in the shamanic astrology paradigm, the Mars position would represent the archetype of masculinity that the US has, Mars and Gemini. And we'll get into that more. And there's a lot of things about the eclipses and the current transits that have been associated with that. And then the third area that I find most intriguing to explore, particularly in light of what's coming up, is the clumping of planets in Cancer. Mercury, which is opposed by Pluto, the Sun, conjunct Jupiter, but also Venus 10 degrees. And actually, when applying the synodic cycle information to the chart of the United States, July 4th, 1776 happened to be the date, the very date that Venus descended into the underworld, in the Venus cycle. And so like that was 10 degrees, and then it's in this morning star, so it will have about 2.5 months after that, Venus in the underworld. And so to me, there's so much in that set of symbols that shows the shadow and the light of the Cancerian potentiality of the United States of America and its shadow. Now, we're doing this inquiry at this time period because we're just about to enter into the first of 2 eclipse seasons in 2021. And every year we'll have 2 eclipse seasons. And sometimes it's 3 eclipses, but most of the time there'll be 2. And the eclipse season starts on May 26th with a total lunar eclipse, which we'll take a look at here. And then it closes with the annular solar eclipse on the 10th of June. That's our upcoming eclipse season. There'll be another one in December, November, December. So let's go back and take a moment to look at the May one. Yeah. So here we'll notice that the nodal axis, as well as the position of the sun and the moon, certainly do remind us of certain things on the U.S. chart. The same ascendant descendant axis, except in this case it's reversed, but it's the same axis. And then we have the moon on the descendant, on the ascendant, and the sun on the descendant of the U.S. chart. So there's certainly a relationship between this upcoming eclipse and while this investigation today is not to specifically go into all the information about eclipses per se and how to work with them, we'll touch on that a little bit. But it has been reported elsewhere, and I'm sure many of you heard this already, that this is the closest moon of the year. So it's a perigee full. They call it the super moon, and it's actually I don't know whether I've really. It's weird how the astronomers have incorporated something that came from esoteric language, and they're calling it the blood moon, right? which they're now calling total eclipses, that because it looks. That doesn't really get red, it's more like orangish, yeah. So we got the super moon, blood moon, right? Which is this lunar eclipse coming up. But you can see some of the other things happening with it in that Gemini zone: Mercury in Gemini, Venus in Gemini, North Node in Gemini, Sun in Gemini. And I think it does have very much to do with what's happening in the U.S. chart, and also we have, look, Mars at 20 Cancer, and so that's not. It's just recently gone over the U.S. Sun and will soon be on the U.S. Mercury. So there's a lot of things about this eclipse that relate to the United States, I believe. Okay, now if we go to the next one. We'll see a lot of the same things. Here we have the sun and moon conjunct at 19 Gemini. That's almost exactly the U.S. Mars. The nodal axis is still at 10, around 10 or 11, Sag Gemini. And it is the case that in any eclipse season, of which, as I mentioned, there's 2 every year, the nodes actually stay pretty much the same degree, for like, a couple months. And so here we are, the node's still around that same point. and the same relationship with the US chart. And Venus in Cancer, and this, by the way, all of these charts, they could have been read for, they could have been, sorry, cast for most any location. I chose to use Philadelphia because that is where the U.S., that's where the Declaration of Independence happened, in Philadelphia, and that was the capital for a long time, actually. So this could be Washington, D.C. also, or you could run it for a different time zone. So those who like to work with the angles understand that the angles are going to be very different in different parts of the world. The Washington, D.C. ones would be very similar to this. But I thought out of consistency, we would use Philadelphia because the U.S. chart that we showed you an example of is also Philadelphia. So just look at a lot of that information you're looking at there, and you can see here that Pluto is still about a degree away from the U.S. Pluto. And Chiron here is at 12. So it still has a bit of a ways to go before, you know, it hits the US 20 degree. But the feeling I get about these two eclipses is that they are presaging what 2023 and 2024 will be about. They're like reminding us of certain things here, or they're keep getting our attention on certain things here that are bringing up our main themes. And for example, I think maybe what we should go to next here. Do you have anything you want to share about these eclipses, Owen?
Well, yeah, I just I like the closeness of the apogee perigee at these eclipses is actually quite rare that you would get it that precise. So, and apogee and perigee during full moon and new moon is when the tides are like the highest high tide and the lowest low tide. So I feel you know, that that's also pretty interesting, that it's almost like we're getting this, like the seesaw getting thrown a little bit extra to either side, presaging some turbulence to come.
Right. You know, it's really, it's an interesting speculation, you know, that back in maybe 2012 or back during even 2000 at the turning of the millennium, we would be having these circles in the school and wondering what's going to happen. You know, there's so many different speculations about what's coming next. And, you know, 2012, the end of the Mayan calendar, the turning of the millennium, plus what we have in our school of the turning of the ages. And sometimes I would make the comment, well, what if absolutely nothing happens? Well, we actually thought about that in 2017. You know, what if nothing happens? Well, certainly, in our view at this point, the events that happened in 2020, 2021 could well be the most globally extraordinary circumstances in 12,800 years. And we've discussed that in other places. Now, it is also true, you could say, what if the Pluto return and the Chiron return are nothing big major happens? It's possible. We hope that from the shadow perspective, by pointing this stuff out and bringing it to attention, that the more difficult things don't occur. You know, I mean, there's always that hope. But after you hear the different clues that we can share with you here in the next portion of our conversation, you can, you know, question everything and come to your own conclusions, you know. But I mean, it's difficult to ignore a lot of this stuff. So let's go to the next slide. Yeah, so in these articles from the last two new moon newsletters, there were several. Pardon me? Yeah, so I did this one in April. going through a lot of the 2021 stuff, the transiting Saturn conjunct the US node, transiting node conjunct the US ascendant-descendant axis, transiting Jupiter conjunct the US moon, hugely important in 2021. I think those are also presaging what's to come. And then we have the 2022, 2023, transiting Saturn conjuncting the US moon, United States Pluto return in 2022. You'll have this as reference for those that didn't have an opportunity to see the articles. And then we have the Chiron return. And in this particular article, I talked about most everything except the triple cross, and now we know the quadruple cross eclipses, and the fourth turning element, which we'll get into as we go through now. But what Alwyn did is he went through the articles and he put them into sort of categories. The event, the essence of the event, the light outcome, we could say, you know, like a less suffering outcome, or like an intended outcome from the highest aspiration of the configuration. And then we would have also the shadow or potential shadow outcome. And I love this way this is broken down. And you can actually see where this comes from when you have the articles for reference. But here we have the Saturn conjunct the US South Node, February 3rd of this year through October 11th at 6 Aquarius. Referendum on the past history and the responsibilities of the US. The light outcome, prompting a look at the authentic Aquarius and the original ideals. And then the shadow, Saturn controlling Aquarius in a top-down way. And that has always been throughout history, the shadow of Aquarius when that happens. And it's the destruction of autonomy, sovereignty, true democracy, and things like that. So that's to me, that's just another remarkable presaging leading up to the 2023, 2024 eclipses. Lunar nodes conjunct the US descendant and ascendant. And in the shamanic astrology paradigm, the nodal axis is like there's a continuum, like a snake biting its tail. Past to future, future connecting to the past, past going to the future. In esoteric symbolism, it was called the worm Ouroboros, a 19-year circuitry with which there's the future, and the idealism on it is that the future is reaching back to get our attention. And that would also be something that would occur in transits on the chart, on an individual chart, the North Node hitting something. The future self reaching back to get our attention, and then looking back to see whether there's some shadow from the past. Light outcome, a chance for the US to change the road it's on. Okay, I like the way that was said. And then shadow outcome, the US selling out its friends and partners, right? Or just succumbing to the shadow of the ascendant, the Sag Gemini axis, which we'll have more to speak of here as we go through. Jupiter conjunct the US moon, also coming up, June 4th, 2022. Wait a minute. Sorry, we made a mistake there. That is Saturn conjunct the US moon. Because Jupiter is hitting the moon this year.
Oh, you're right. Yeah.
Yeah. Incidentally, for those watching this vlogcast, this is also kind of a practice run for what we'll do at the solstice event. So this is really good. So this is actually Saturn conjunct the US moon, and that's a 30-year testing ground on the same issues. Whether the US has right use of its Aquarius moon. The entire Gemini job in the Aquarius tribe storyline. the light outcome. Truth could become important again. Objective reality could inspire a change in the course that can remember the original ideals of freedom, liberty, and individuality. Shadow outcome, totalitarianism of collectivism, hijacking of the egalitarian freedom ideals for the, quote, greater good, and the belief in transhumanism, artificial intelligence, and democracy becoming the rule of the majority. Yep, yep. Then going forward, the US Pluto return, compost what is dead, decayed and spent. The death throes of patriarchy, hierarchical controls, and rotten bureaucratic systems, and a reanimated version of the Circle of Grandmothers and Council of Elders. That would be kind of like going back to the Iroquois Foundation, the Council of Elders in the Iroquois Confederation, and to include the Circle of Grandmothers, which our founding fathers left out. Shadow outcome, the end of the United States. Basically, it breaks apart, and then we'll see some more ideas about this when we see the fourth turning material. Chiron return. And that's in April 2024 to February 2025, 20 Aries, indicating where a specific wounding or fracture point is located, and to serve as a teacher to help digest the wound, transform it into an elixir or medicine. Light outcome, deep reckoning and referendum on the original intent and promise of the American project. And then certainly one of the shadows here is the shadow side of Cancer, and that's one of the big shadows on the US chart. And the reason why this is put in here is because on the natal chart, Chiron is squaring the US sun. And actually that's happening already now. Chiron at 12 in the next year, the square to the US sun will already be in play before the Chiron return exactly happens. So that's some of the basic information, which not including the eclipses. So now let's move into the eclipse part of this, which, oh my goodness. Now, until this morning, in our the conversation with Owen and the little research we did, I was referring to the triple cross, which is you take the path of the total solar eclipse of August 21st, 2017, which I had the opportunity to see. There was a group of shamanic astrologers that were gathered together in Oregon, and we saw that. And then there is the total eclipse of April 8th, 2024, that crosses the New Madrid Fault, the place that you can see. There's going to be many, many, many cities. It's detailed in the article where that goes across. And it crosses right around Carbondale, Illinois. And actually both of these eclipses, the 2017 one, which was only a couple of minutes long, and the 2024 one, which I think is over 4 minutes long, you can see how much of the continental US is crossed by these two, and the fact that they would cross like that. And a lot of people have written about this one. But one of the things that happens sometimes is annular solar eclipses kind of get left out. They're sort of downplayed. They don't get as much credit as I think they deserve, because they're absolutely as exact as far as a new moon, as far as the sun-moon conjunction. But it's just that the moon is not quite big enough to cover the sun. But the pathway of the annularity of the ring eclipse is about the same as for a total eclipse. So there's just a swath, the specific swath of the Earth that is covered by the path of the eclipse. And so if you bring in the annular eclipse in 2023, there's a cross also. And that's in the vicinity of San Antonio, San Angelo. A lot of Texas gets covered by these two pathways, and then actually that pathway of the 2023 one covers some pretty remarkable territory in the Yucatan and Central America and South America, the Amazon. I mean, the track of that one is really interesting in ways beyond just the US. We're just focusing on the US right here now. Also you can see on this map, just if you wonder what that is up there, the annular solar eclipse of June 10th just barely grazes the northern part. Actually, one simulation I saw has it not reaching the border of Michigan, while another one did, but it's just right on the edge. It goes through Canada. Actually, it goes from across Greenland and then down across into Canada. It's an interesting track of that one, but it's not really part of the cross. Now notice, what is the third cross? Just off the coast of Oregon, they crossed. And then they're going across Oregon here. So we have the total solar eclipse of 2017 crossing with the path of the annular in 2023. So that's where the imagery of the triple cross came out, right? Now, our discovery was that if you put in an annular eclipse of 2012, you actually get 4 crosses. So I should have thought of this before. It turns out that's when I saw, actually. I had a small group. We went up to the Vermilion Hills and in northern Arizona to see this one. It was spectacular. It's the first time I'd ever seen the phenomena of during the exact annularity, the ring around the moon became like a multicolored pinwheel. So it was like for the duration of it, multicolored, like going around the moon. It was really quite stunning. But here you can see that in not too different an area, they crossed out in the Pacific. And then the 2017 one, you can see passed through Oregon. The 2012 one passed through Northern California and Southern Oregon. And look, it's Texas. And while we did not have a map that showed this one and the ones after 2020 together, yes, in fact, there is a place where the one from 2023 will cross the one from 2012. And one of the places that both cross is Roswell, New Mexico, interestingly, and Los Alamos, so these are very, very interesting places that these eclipses pass over. And now, there's a lot of different views about what could this all mean. I think at the very least, it can suggest, got to pay attention. These pathways, these swaths are telling us something. Like the one in 2012 actually started in China and ends up in Texas, interestingly. But some people say 3-year effect. Some say that it's what happens later. Sometimes if you look ahead, is something happening now? It does seem to be some kind of a message happening, and to have 4 crosses in the United States from 2012 to 2024, I'm not aware of that happening before. It may have, but these are not very, there's places on the planet that don't even have even one annular or solar eclipse path hit for hundreds of years, so to have 4 of them in such a time period is like certainly pointing out things in the US. Well, let's take a quick look at the chart of the 2017 one. And certainly the main thing I noticed there is the relation to the Leo, basically the Leo and also the nodal axis, which is very much related to South Node at 24 Aquarius. That's the U.S. moon, and so the Aquarius Leo axis is quite important here, and it also could be thought of as a presaging event. And you'll also note that if you run it for Philadelphia, you'll notice that it's 5 degrees Sag rising. Now, does that remind you of anything? We've been talking about the Sag-Gemini axis, some very similar area of the zodiac. And remember, now this is the one that crosses in Texas, as well as off the Oregon coast. Okay, let's go to the 2023. Here we have, if you'll notice, the Chiron position is 17, North Node 24, which is very close to the US Chiron. But most important is look at Pluto. Pluto 2753, the US Pluto 2732. When you use the date range on an individual horoscope, this is just past the Pluto cycle. But geez, it's certainly really close. And myself and other members of the school, we actually think it even includes 2021, and certainly 2023, 2024. But the closeness of Pluto at this particular eclipse, I think, is quite amazing, and something to certainly take note of as we look ahead. And then that also is bringing the attention on that crossing area in Texas. 2024. Now this is the one that to me is the most mind-blowing. Here we have, so by the time we get to 2024, Pluto has already moved into Aquarius. And that's a whole other conversation we'll have at another time about the shadow of the different signs when Pluto moves into a different sign. But look at the point of the eclipse. Sun, Moon, 1924 Aries. And this is not a trick. Look at Chiron, 1924 Aries. I mean, how can you even make this stuff up? The new moon solar eclipse that's crossing the entire US, that crosses the 2017 one, is exactly the degree in the minute of 1924 Chiron. The US Chiron is 2008 Aries. I mean, it's hard to imagine anything more informative than seeing this. So you're as I've gone through this, anything come up for you as we're discussing this somehow, and anything insight I've missed or something? What are your thoughts?
Well, I just love to point out how the Pluto and Chiron cycles are like these big, long cycles that last, year, almost 2 years, whereas the eclipses are these short bursts of very intense time periods that are just kind of punctuation points, highlighting what's going on in these bigger, longer cycles. And yeah, just the fact that this particular one is punctuating that longer cycle with such precision makes me want to go back to that chart, to see what the light and shadow of the Chiron return was, and really, feel into what is being offered there.
You mean the other Chiron returns? Yeah. Also, speaking of the larger cycles, one important piece that I didn't bring up is that that south node, 15 Libra, the US Saturn is 48 Libra. So the south node of this 2024 chironic solar eclipse over 4 minutes long has the nodes placed in so close. I mean, the south node right with the Saturn position of the US. So, I mean, I could have written a piece about that also, you know. So, I mean, and then that goes back, what that would refer to then is the larger cycle relationship between the US Chiron and its Saturn, because on the natal chart, they're opposite. So we have Chiron at 20 Aries and Saturn at 14 Libra. So I mean, there's so many symbols. You could do like a whole workshop on just any one of these different pieces. And so we're looking ahead. This is a precursor, a presaging of this time period coming up, 2023, 2024. But there's one other piece of the puzzle here. Now that you've taken in the quadruple cross, you know, I kind of liked the expression triple cross. It sounds a little bit more easy on the tongue than quadruple cross, but God, I mean, it just adds more. You know, here we have, for those who like the tri-wheels, we have this for your reference also. The 2020 for the one happy, the ones this year. Yeah. Okay, now the next thing I want to bring out is this fourth turning idea. And I have referenced this before. The book by, it's written in 1997 by William Strauss and Neil Howe. And I've gained a lot from this book in terms of the timeline material, looking at cycles. There's really no astrology in this book, but boy, astrologers could just really use some of the insights in that book to understand what's happening in the world process. There's a lot of psychology and history in it. There's a lot about archetypes in it. But the part that I'm wanting to focus in on is the view that there is about a 90-year time period called a saeculum, and it comes from the Etruscans, where they noticed that the oldest, generally the oldest elder, wise person at any time was about 90. And then in the course of 90 years or so, it wasn't like absolutely fixed 90, 4 generations would turn over. And to me, that 4 generations is connected to the 3 Saturn returns. So in like 88 to 90, something like that. Now, I'm just wanting to bring to your attention, I mean, the book is really just a lot of stuff in it. I mean, it's definitely worth your attention. And I'm only going to bring up just one small part of it, which is that we're taking us back now to one of the saeculums, 1704, 1727 was when it started. But it ends with a 4th turning. The turnings are the 4 generations within a saeculum. And if you go back to the beginning of it, in the early 1700s, then we get to, so that's the first, and then the second is 1727, and then the third is 1746 to 1773, which is the French and Indian War. But the thing I'm wanting to point out is the 4th turning was the American Revolution, 1773, 1794. And there's, of course, many things in Europe, the French Revolution, everything else. And so that was an unraveling and a beginning, like an end and a beginning. The American Revolution, that was the 4th turning. Then we go through another saeculum from that point on. We can just skip through all the stuff we're skipping through is fascinating information historically, but we don't have time in this presentation to go through all of it. So let's move up to the Civil War. no, back to where the fourth turning in Civil War. There is a fourth turning, 1860, 1865. So we have the Civil War in the United States, and an end and a beginning, which these things, according to the writers, always happen at a fourth turning. And then we jump ahead. We go through another saeculum, and we go through all these turnings, which actually just briefly, we'll go back a little bit. I can just mention a couple of things here. The first turning, the Reconstruction and Gilded Age. Then the second turning, the Third Great Awakening. That goes back into some of the previous ones. And then the third turning, World War I and Prohibition. And then the fourth turning, the Great Depression and World War II, 1929 to 1946. And he, of course, begins it with the Black Tuesday stock market crash. And it ends with the end of World War II, and then like a whole new world order that came out of that. And then going forward into the saeculum we're in now, we have the first turning, termed the American High, 1946 to 1964. The second turning, 1964 to 1984, consciousness revolution, and many, many different ingredients, things that happened during that time. And then we have the 1984, and when he wrote the book, he put 2005 question mark. One of the writers has passed on, but the other one, Neil Howe, believes that actually the date of the end of the third turning was 9/11. So therefore, that would be 2001. That would be that the end and the beginning of that third turning. And then that was followed then by the fourth turning, which he termed the millennial crisis. And according to the stuff they wrote in the late 1990s, and then according to Neil Howe, they keep thinking about, well, when is it? It was 2025 was the guess, that it would be between 2020 and 2025 that the end of the fourth turning would happen, and that would be a complete turnover. You can see why this is a value in our analysis of the Pluto and Chiron returns, and also the larger sense of the turning of the ages and all the other stuff that we've looked at, including the end of Kali Yuga. All these things kind of dovetailing in the next few years. And you can look at pretty much any framework, even just putting attention on Pluto and Aquarius, that shift. But now here we have a description of the different generations, by the way. So what they do in this book is they give the dates on the fourth of the different turnings, first, second, third, and fourth turning. And then they describe the different generations. So the boom generation, the baby boomers, you know. So I'm in that one, 1943 to 1960. And then when this book was written, they actually before this book, they came out with a book called Generations, and they were coining this next one as being the 13th generation. But this is the one that has become known as Generation X. And that's about 1961 to 1981. And if you look at birth charts, if you look at the people you know, you can actually get a real sense of the in-between. If someone is born in 1960, 61, you know, are they a boomer or are they a Generation X? Fascinating how that operates. And there's a kind of a big difference. It also does correspond in a lot of ways to the movement of Pluto into a different sign. And then we have the one after that. And these authors are the ones that are responsible for naming this one, the millennial generation. Born 1982 in that time frame, and then that generation would come to an end at about 2001. So kids born after 2001, that's a whole other one, which hasn't been officially named, although I've heard some really interesting suggestions for it. Maybe you have too, Owen. I mean, I'm not sure what you've heard, but one of my favorite ways of describing this current one is the iGen. Basically they're pair bonded with their iPhones, So, so that's the one that we don't know what's going to happen with it. And so as we approach the end of the fourth turning, then we are. Who knows what's going to happen now? The speculation on this, just you can go into the details of this, in the book. It's not clear what will happen with an unraveling. That it's really up to the consciousness of those that go through the breakdown. For example, the Civil War did result in a huge change, but it actually reverted after that. And so the ideals of the emancipation and everything else that went through a pretty hard time after that. There was certainly a high after the American Revolution. If you think of what happened after World War II, that actually was an amazing time period in that it set up the largest and most successful middle class that we know of, certainly in most recorded history. There are those that may disagree, saying that actually some of the golden age of hunter-gatherer was better, but relative to our culture, civilized technological culture, U.S. came together, Europe came together, world pretty much came together. There was a shadow side to it, of course, but it was a project that actually succeeded for a great number of people. They are wondering what will happen now, and they thought that populism would be one of the things that would take place, but they didn't know whether it would be right-wing or left-wing populism. I mean, it's just that they knew that it would be populism. I don't think they took it so far to realize that it's possible that it would have been the shadow of Aquarius that would take place. I need to find out more of what Neil Howe is saying right now, but just some little clues I got is that Europe is also in the fourth turning. I've heard that China is in a fourth turning, but Russia is not. But I need to get more information about that. The Russian history is kind of is a different one than the rest of the European and American history. So hopefully this has given a good introductory view, a wider view of what is taking place. And I'm sure over these next years, as we go forward, you're going to be hearing more and more and more about these upcoming events. So this is like prepare for 2023 and 2024. I did have one other last thing that I was going to summarize with, but let me just turn it over to you and see, and get your thoughts, Owen.
Oh no, I think it's just wait and see. That's what I feel right now. So nothing particular to add at this moment.
Well, I just think to be aware, and to not think it's like some normal kind of thing, and these things that are happening are very rare from a lot of different perspectives. The fourth turning, the quadruple cross, Chiron return, Pluto return, not to speak of the eclipses in this next month. And also these other aspects to the U.S. chart with Saturn and Jupiter and the nodal axis. There's a lot of really important clues there. I wanted to just maybe summarize one quick thing. And it's as I look at the U.S. chart, and this is kind of like a summary of that, the slide you prepared showing light and shadow and essence, that when I look at the U.S. chart, the three primary areas that could be thought of as its greatest gifts and also where its potential shadow. Number one, it would be the light and shadow of the Aquarius moon the Gemini job in the Aquarius tribe, the Sagittarius job in the Sagittarius tribe, which from a truth level, from a visionary level, from a quest for meaning and purpose, you know, all the highest ideals of Sagittarius are in that original blueprint, with the Aquarian lineage associated with it. However, there's also the shadow side of that, light polarization, but also fundamentalism, you know, like, which, who cannot see that sometimes, with ideas of we're the good guys, you know, we're the white hats, we're number one, a way of our truth is the truth, that kind of thing. That's a fundamentalist version of it. Then if we look at the Cancerian part that I mentioned, what's really marvelously possible with those Cancer elements is looking at the global family, you know, making the world work for everyone. The ideals, which would be similar to like Buckminster Fuller, triple Cancer view of making the world work for everyone. The shadow side is provincialism, you know, which is the downside of jingoistic nationalism. We're number one, you know, or the thing, having traveled around most of the world, the thing about Americans in general, and I don't mean the audience listening right at this moment, but, you know, like a standard thing about Americans is they often are not interested in the rest of the world. You know, they're not even interested in what's happening in other parts of the country. They're stunned to find out how the U.S. is stacking up or being thought of in other parts of the world today. So that kind of provincialism, you know, only, you know, got to be a white American or something, right? Now, then the third thing would be the Gemini part. And Jung warned about this. Actually, many archetypal psychologists and Jungians warned about this, that it's a puer culture. It means eternal youth. And only one element of that is the youth culture, but it's also shows the shadow side of the relegation of the elders to care homes, and actually even beyond that, no really deep initiatory processes into elderhood. You know, that's one of the hallmarks of a puer, eternus addicted culture. And so those are, but yet on the other side, there's that curiosity and the intelligence and the fun that can happen with Gemini also. So it's both the light and shadow of that. But the U.S. does have Mars in Gemini, and there's so much happening on that part of the U.S. chart this year. You know, and also that more research now we need to do on the 2012 eclipse, which also was when the nodal axis was in the Gemini Sag aspect, you know, 9.5 years back. So that has a connection also too. More research to do, Owen, and boy, we should have a very interesting conversation when it gets to the summer solstice, which is not that far away now. Any final words before we say goodbye?
Well, I also know we are planning a webinar on how to use shamanic astrology for timing events like weddings and signing contracts and
right.
making a constitution. And I'm just curious what your thoughts would be on signing such an important document right as Venus enters the underworld. Would that be something you might avoid?
Well, I have heard, and I think Ridjar felt this, that the timing of the signing was esoterically determined, right? You know, in other words, whether that's actually when it got signed or not, but it's like that's the one they wanted to put down, right? And even if it got signed the day before, they did some ceremony in order to have this be the chart, you know. So they did know about this kind of stuff, you know. They were all, you know, Freemasons and Illuminati and, you know, and so on, depending on how you want to see the light and dark of that subject. But I have a feeling, could be completely wrong. But I doubt very much that they were taking into account the synodic cycle that Venus was going into the underworld. But that's something for us to notice and be aware of. So that I don't know, but that's a fascinating question. Were they aware that this was the day that Venus was going into the underworld? I don't know. So, okay. Next month, I'm not sure what the subject will be yet, but it'll maybe a deeper dive into some of the other mystery schools we haven't looked at yet. Otherwise, great sharing this with you, Awen, and until our presentation that we do next month, right? So.
All right, yeah, we've got a couple exciting eclipses between now and then, so maybe that will spark some.
Actually, we're having a graduation of 7 foundationally certified people on the day of the lunar eclipse. Actually, it'll just as it's almost back to full is when we're doing the graduation ceremony coming up next in a few days. Actually, yeah. You're welcome to be there for it if you want.
All right, thank you.
Right. All right. See you. Till next time. Bye.
Bye now.